The rainbow tunic. Joseph was born into a house of complex rivalries. As the firstborn of Jacob's beloved wife, Rachel, he was the crown jewel of his father's old age. To signify this favor, Jacob gifted him a ketnet passing a tunic of many colors or diverse reaches. While Joseph wore the vibrant threads of a prince, his 10 older brothers wore the rough wool of laborers. The coat was a constant, silent provocation, a visual reminder that Joseph was destined for a different life than the one behind. A flock of sheep. The night visions. The tension reached a breaking point when Joseph began to dream. In the first, sheaves of wheat in a field bowed to his upright sheaf. In the second, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. When he shared these visions, he wasn't just being a naive younger brother. He was claiming a divine mandate. His brothers' hatred solidified into a hard, cold thing. They began to see him not as a sibling, but as a threat to their own inheritance and honor. The echo in the cistern, sent by Jacob to check on his brothers in Dothan, Joseph was spotted from a distance. "Here comes the dreamer," they mocked. They stripped him of his hated coat and threw him into a dry pit. As they sat nearby eating a meal, ignoring his cries, a caravan of Midianite traders appeared. At Judah's suggestion, they pulled Joseph up and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. By sunset, Joseph was bound in a merchant's line, walking toward a land he had only heard of in stories, Egypt. The overseer of Potiphar. In Egypt, Joseph was purchased by Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. Joseph didn't despair. He adapted. He applied his father's management skills to Potiphar's estate. Soon, everything Potiphar owned from the fields to the kitchen was under Joseph's care. He was a man of comely person, possessing a quiet authority that commanded respect. But his success drew the wrong kind of attention from Potiphar's wife, whose false accusations eventually landed Joseph in the king's prison. The dungeon and the wine. Prison was Joseph's second pit, but even there, he rose to the top, becoming the warden's trusted assistant. When Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and baker were imprisoned, Joseph interpreted their haunting dreams. He predicted the cupbearer's restoration and the baker's execution. His only request to the cupbearer was, "Remember me when it goes well with you." But the cupbearer forgot, and Joseph languished in silence for 2 more years. The 7 years of gold. Pharaoh was eventually troubled by dreams of 7 thin cows devouring 7 fat ones. The cupbearer finally remembered the Hebrew in the dungeon. Shaved and dressed in clean linen, Joseph stood before the king of Egypt. He didn't just interpret the dream as a coming famine. He provided a brilliant economic solution. Pharaoh was so moved by Joseph's wisdom that he took off his signet ring and put it on Joseph's finger. At age 30, the slave became the vizier, the grain of mercy. When the famine struck, it hit Canaan hard. Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy food. When they bowed before the vizier, they didn't recognize the dreamer they had sold 20 years prior. Joseph played a long game of testing, wanting to see if they would protect their youngest brother, Benjamin, or betray him as they had betrayed Joseph. When Judah offered to become a slave in Benjamin's place, Joseph knew they were changed men. The great reveal. In a room filled with Egyptian officials, Joseph broke down. "I am Joseph," he cried in his native tongue. The brothers were terrified, expecting execution. Instead, Joseph embraced them. He saw the invisible hand of providence explaining that while they intended evil, God used a journey to save lives. He invited his father and the entire clan to live in the fertile land of Goshen. The final blessing. The final years of Joseph's life were spent in peace. He watched his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, grow under the blessing of their grandfather Jacob. He saw the house of Israel flourish in Egypt, protected by his shadow. As he grew old, Joseph became a bridge between two worlds, an Egyptian statesman in body, but a Hebrew patriarch in soul. The oath of the bones. At the age of 110, Joseph felt his strength failing. He gathered his brothers and their children. He made them swear a sacred oath. When God eventually led them out of Egypt back to the promised land, they must carry his bones with them. He died with his eyes on the future, a dreamer until the very end. His body was embalmed in the Egyptian fashion, but his spirit remained tied to the hills of Canaan. The silent years of Zaphnath-Paneah, between his rise to power and the arrival of his brothers, Joseph lived as an Egyptian. He was given the name Zaphnath-Paneah, meaning God speaks and he lives. He married Asenath, the daughter of a high priest, and mastered the intricate politics of the Nile, yet, in the quiet of his palace, he remained a man of two worlds. When his first son was born, he named him Manasseh, saying, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. It was a name of healing, but also a name of survival. He was learning to live with a past he thought he would never see again. The horizon of dust. The 7 years of abundance passed like a dream. Then the Nile began to fail. The green banks turned to cracked clay, and the horizon of dust arrived. Because of Joseph's foresight, Egypt's granaries were bursting. Soon, people from all known lands began to arrive at the gates of the capital. Among the crowds of weary travelers, Joseph's sharp eyes caught 10 figures that made his heart stop. They were older, graying, and weathered, but he knew them instantly, his brothers. They bowed low, their faces to the dirt, fulfilling the dream from 20 years prior. The silver cup and the test. Joseph did not reveal himself immediately. He spoke harshly through an interpreter, accusing them of being spies. He imprisoned Simeon and demanded they return with their youngest brother, Benjamin, to prove their story. When they finally returned with Benjamin, Joseph's heart broke for his mother's only other son. He planted his own divination cup of silver in Benjamin's sack. As the brothers were leaving, his guards overtook them. The discovery of the cup meant Benjamin would be enslaved forever. This was the ultimate test. Would they abandon the favorite again, or would they stand together? Judah's plea. Judah, the man who had once suggested selling Joseph for silver, stepped forward. In a speech that is one of the most moving in ancient literature, he offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. He spoke of their father Jacob's fragile heart and how the loss of Benjamin would kill him. Seeing that his brothers were no longer the men who threw him in a pit, Joseph's Egyptian mask finally shattered. He wept so loudly that the people in Pharaoh's palace heard him. "I am Joseph," he cried. "Is my father still alive?" The trek to Goshen. Pharaoh, hearing that Joseph's family had arrived, commanded that they be brought to Egypt in the finest royal wagons. The reunion between Joseph and Jacob was a scene of restoration that seemed impossible. Jacob, who had spent 20 years in mourning, wept on Joseph's neck for a long time. Joseph settled his family in Goshen. the most fertile pasture land in Egypt. For 17 years, Joseph looked after his father, providing for the clan as they grew from a family into a tribe. The death of a patriarch. As Jacob lay dying, he called Joseph and his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to his bedside. In a final act of prophetic wisdom, Jacob crossed his arms, placing his right hand on the younger son, Ephraim, and his left on the firstborn, Manasseh. Joseph tried to correct him, but Jacob insisted the younger would be greater. This echoed Joseph's own life, the one cast out becoming the one who leads. After Jacob passed, Joseph led a massive funeral procession back to Canaan to bury his father in the cave of Machpelah, honoring the land of their ancestors. The legacy of the scepter. The final chapter of Joseph's life was one of quiet stewardship. He lived to see the 3rd generation of his grandchildren. He watched the sons of his brothers flourish, and he never held a grudge for the years he lost in the dungeon. He remained the lord of the land, but his heart was always with the promise made to his great-grandfather Abraham. On his deathbed, Joseph didn't speak of Egyptian glory. He spoke of the Exodus. He knew that one day his people would leave the safety of Egypt. He made them swear that his bones would not be left in a foreign pyramid, but would travel with them to the land of milk and honey. When he breathed his last at 110, he died as the man who turned a pit into a palace and a betrayal into a blessing.